Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. So everyone, we're so excited to have Hendrika de Vries join us back on Big Blend Radio. She was on our show a few years ago with her memoir. It was called When a Toy Dog Became a Wolf and the Moon Broke Curfew. I think I had a hard time actually saying that the very first time, Ron, and I got through it, but it is a special meaning. And I'm going to say this, that Hendrika's books, all her titles have a special meaning, and her latest book is coming out, so you can pre-order it. You can go to agirlfromamsterdam.com, go to your favorite book place and pre-order it, because I'm going to tell you, you want it. It's called Open Turns, and Hendrika is back on the show. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me on your show again.
It's been about like 5-6 years, I think.
Yes, it was just pre-COVID. Yeah.
And we're still here.
We're still here. Yes.
Do you say that a lot with your books, you know, having lived through World War II and all of that with your family and moving? And do you ever kind of get that, like, we're still here, it's okay?
More and more. A lot. Yes. And especially since my book, you know, the title kind of sums it up, the open turns, even though it's a swimming term, it also really, for me, talks about the many turning points in my own life and in people's lives.
When you, because as a swimmer, so you went to Australia from Amsterdam area, right? And that was in World War II. Escaped going to Australia. And I think a lot of people forget that Australia was also a zone where people moved to. We think we forget this.
Yeah.
In South Africa, I knew that in high school history. We were actually taught that, but I don't think they're taught that here.
Well, my book, actually, I start with that because we moved to Australia a few years after the war, and I talk a lot. You know, my first book, of course, talks about my experiences as a little girl in World War II occupied Amsterdam. But then, well, after the war, there were quite a few circumstances that created a huge immigration movement to Australia and Canada. And I start my second book, this one, Open Turns, with that kind of story, of people needing to leave behind memories and looking for new open spaces, really, looking for new life where they could get away from the trauma that they'd experienced. And Holland at the time also had a housing shortage. And so the big transition that I start with in my book is getting on board the ship and moving to Australia. And it talks a lot about that particular time and what immigration looked like in those days.
Yeah, it's really interesting because immigration is not easy. Even now, when we have all these other conveniences, it's not as easy. And I look at when you had to, you know, go to Australia, and it's not like, oh, pack your favorite things all the time, is it? It's just not as easy. You know, you get your certain things and sometimes you don't. And having lived through different places in Africa and England and having to move, I went to 16 different schools. And when we left South Africa, we really had to go. And when we left, it was about your life. And I think this is something interesting because you had no idea what you're going to, that feeling. And when you landed, you didn't have time. You had time when you were traveling to contemplate a bit, but you couldn't waste too much time on the past. You had to build yourself up. There's this internal dialogue. And I wanted to go to you with this, where I think people don't understand the greatest generation was the silent generation, because there were moments you just really needed to take stock and then make the next step, even if it was wrong. You didn't really have time to brood on everything because you needed to move forward. And I think people kind of didn't realize that. And if, yes, martinis came out of it later in the time and whatever, that's fine. But my movement, we didn't have time to think other than know you're going there and trust yourself to know what to do and really trust yourself. Is that kind of the same feeling? And what do you think about that silent generation?
I really loved the way you just summed that up, Lisa. And I'm trying to just kind of get in touch with that again. because when we left Holland, it was all about the future. Like you said, you left behind what had happened, and you moved into that place of hope, that place of
Mm-hmm.
a new life. And I think actually, being an immigrant in any generation, and yes, I'm part of that silent generation, but
Mm-hmm.
any generation brings out that need for resilience, that resilience to step up and learn a new language, leave behind family, culture. And I think that's why when I talk here to my friends, my American friends, when we talk about migrants, that is the gift that the migrant stories bring to us, that resilience and can be second, third generation. There's still that aspect of people who were able to create a whole new life in a new place and bring that hope, that resilience, that strength, that
Yeah,
imagination.
because they also knew they were being watched in a way.
Oh, you have to, as an immigrant, and I have this in my book, because I was 13 when we first went there, and the realization all of a sudden, I'm an immigrant. What does that mean? It's like, what makes me different from the Australian girls that are born there? You have to earn your place.
Yes, and you have to know when to hand that card out
That's
or
right.
not. I
Yeah.
always think that you need to be careful because when you go to a new place, you're looked at, you're the new thing,
Yeah.
and you'll be ghosted, as we talk about in these days,
That's
within
right.
24 hours. You think you're high and mighty, you got it. I made it through with all the new snobs of the school or whatever it is, and you get there, and the next day you're down in the dumps. So you have
Yeah.
to know, I've got to learn to
Yeah.
just
Yeah. And
be
and I
good with myself.
Well, there you go. Yes, absolutely. And I have some chapters in the book where, I was a swimmer, and at one point I was a champion swimmer, and being asked questions and then going over in my mind, what can I answer? That sort of,
Mm.
how do I want to talk about the trauma that I experienced? No, that's too hard. Do I want to say that I feel safe in the pool? Well, that's too personal. So coming up with answers that feel right at the time, and I think that's Bonnie Too, I think, writes about that, or some Susan Cohen maybe in a book From There to Here, who talks about migrants, and I think Bonnie Too touches on it too. But it's that migrants have always got this inner dialogue going.
Yes, because you're living two lives. You're
That's
keeping your culture, your human, your family. At the same time, you want to put the best show on.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And that's I think if I look at my story, it's um what's that path to identity and belonging that as an immigrant and as an immigrant young girl, I was also an adolescent. So then, and when my friends who read my first book, and they kept asking me, write about your time in Australia, and I kept thinking, well, what about an immigrant girl, an adolescent, a teenager, 1950s Australia could be of importance to today's reader? And then I began to think about all the transitions that people make. We had the fires in California, and I was a
Hmm.
therapist. I worked with people who had major transitions in their life, losses and deaths and endings of marriages or careers. And I realized that there's a big similarity between the transition that an immigrant has to make and the transitions that we all make
Oh,
at different times in our lives.
and it's so beautiful because I want to bring folks who know us traveling the country. Nancy and I, we travel full time, and you can't keep your car full. You have to unload and sometimes throw away to bring something new in. You can't buy a new shirt without getting rid of the old. You may use it as a rag on the floor or something, but it's going to have its last transition at some point. And we've learned that, you only have one glass.
Yeah,
There's what you do with this
yeah,
glass of water, and you can't keep stuffing, you can't put more water in, you can dry it out for sure. And I feel that with this whole world of immigration, what you're talking about is just such I think we forget the humanity of it all and how people are actually trying to do good. Have a very political world right now where everyone's yelling at each other. And I think sometimes it's really great to read someone's personal story to maybe get the texture, the feel, the understanding, the empathy, to make decisions a little bit more than everyone yelling at each other on its screen on a TV. I
Yeah.
really believe that. And I think what you've done, and through both your books, it's giving this tangibility that seems so distant. And now when we're in cell phone technology and AI and all this stuff, it's great, but we want that tangibility, don't we?
We really do. And we need it. We need it. And it's really interesting to me because I have my father who had PTSD from the war needed to go to an open space in Australia. So we spent a year in the bush. And in my book, I talk about there was one person who was very anti-migrant, but then there were other people who were totally supportive and helpful. As a teenager, how I was supported by these people that embraced us, and how we could kind of minimize the person who, as my mother said, was just misinformed.
That's a beautiful way of putting it.
Yeah, and it really, I think, going through the story as I was writing the story, which, by the way, was a little more difficult than my first story. My first story, it's the voice of a little girl. In this story, it's the voice of a teenager.
And all stuff happens.
And so there were times where I'm going, am I really going to allow her to say that? Okay.
Yeah, she did it. Yeah, you have to be honest. Isn't
Yeah.
that wild? Yeah, the honesty.
But the resilience and leaning into the goodness of people, and this is what really I wanted my story to really give that feel that we all live through these transitions. All have times where we feel alien in a place where we
I've been through fires and lost things in a fire, and you are naked. Your clothes are gone.
Yeah,
basically,
a couple of friends who've just been widowed or widower, they suddenly feel like they're in a whole new world. They're no longer a couple, and they're having to adjust and adapt. And so really looking at what helps us. What helps us go through these transitions? And I think that's where the migrant experience is such an important one to look at. And also
what's strong, because it's like you're boldly going where you don't know for a fact. And America sent out, I just did a podcast about moonshiners and bootleggers in Kansas, and it was the history of it. And actually a lot of them were women, and they had no money, but these were all immigrant women. In fact, look up the Amazon Army March of women who stood up, all immigrant women standing up for their rights of their husbands working in these mines. They got ads. Yours is World War II. That's traumatic. This was, hey, we're in Europe after all this, and stuff was not good. We're starving. Come to America, and our streets are paved with gold.
Yes. Yeah. It's
I get here, and it's like, oopsie, no, we lied.
Yeah, I have a whole section on how the Australian, at the time after World War II, Australia needed immigrants, and how they sent salespeople to Amsterdam with brochures and promises of warm weather and abundance. So I think that whole story of how we as human beings adapt and move and try to create better lives for our children and our families, and how we are at receiving those people is as important today as it was in my time after World War II, and maybe in some ways even more important right now.
Now, have you done extra genealogy for all of this, where you do your family history and look up your family tree? Have you done any of that?
I did some of that. Yeah. It's and we have an interesting story. What I found out, like my mother, when she was older, started to look a little Chinese. Now, we had French and Dutch and very Scandinavian and German, some Eastern European in our genealogy. But my sister and I kept saying, gosh, she looks like a little Chinese lady. When I did one of those tests, I forget which one it was now, but it showed like, I think 1% or something.
Did she went Chinese?
Yeah. Well,
see, you never know, because the boundaries were not that far.
Yeah.
And we talk about Scandinavia, we are both Nancy and I getting these things on our hands from the Scandinavian dupredny or something, where your hands, your tendons on your,
I have that.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, we have
Yeah.
it. Yeah, we're Vikings.
Yeah, we are. Yes.
Yes, we know. Don't mess with us. Okay.
Yeah, that's
And I'm meeting people all the time going, look at my palms. Am I your family? And they're going, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, that is so funny because one of my dearest friends is Norwegian, and she got the pretense, and I said, "Okay, we're just the Viking women."
Yeah, we are. Look at us. It's like, I don't know what we did, but we did something, you know. It's really interesting. But I think going through the past of these kinds of huge changes, you're also teaching people of change is a constant. This is something you have to embrace. And I think we have to look at it as doors of opportunity. Every time you swam in the pool, you had the opportunity to win. Or
Yeah.
you could look at it as an opportunity to lose.
Yeah.
Isn't there a mindset we have to do that's a change?
And I had both. I had fame. I won some really beautiful victories, and I also failed. I had hopes of going to the Olympics and didn't make that. That was an opportunity because that was a big learning, and I was very fortunate. My parents never allowed me to think of myself as a victim. We went
Good.
so much. They always said that every problem was a challenge to that had a solution somewhere, an opportunity to find your inner strengths, to find your inner champion. If you be the outer champion at that time, you could find your inner champion. One of the psychiatrists that I really loved, I'm a therapist, was Robert J. Lifton, who talked about overcoming tragedies, and he wrote about Hiroshima and also other times. And he put it so beautifully. He said, "Don't let yourself be incapacitated by thinking of yourself as a victim."
Oh, I love that.
Don't you love that? Find that inner champion, find that inner resilience, because that's bringing something new in the world. Because, like you just said, life is always going to bring us challenges. You may lose your house in a fire, you may lose your partner, you may lose part of your health, or so many things. Life is that's life. And it's how you make those turns, how you make those transitions. And as swimmers, open turns it's a swimming term. It describes a turn that breaststroke swimmers make. And I was a breaststroke butterfly swimmer. And it's a particular way of making the turn at the end of the lane. 2 hands and you turn.
I remember I did it. Yeah.
And it's not a flip turn, it's an open turn, and it's really important, that turn, because if you've watched the Olympic Games with swimming, somebody can be way ahead, and if they don't do the turn properly, they're going to be behind in the next lane when they turn. So it's the same in life. When we have those turning points, those transitions, they're thresholds, and it's how we deal with those turning points. And I think we sometimes don't look enough at those turning points in our life as actually the times that show us who we really are.
Yeah, because you're in the thick of it and maybe acting out. There could be bad language, and that's okay. All of that's supposed to go there. And then you go, oh, well, how are you going to act perfectly? We're human, and humans are not perfect.
No.
So I think once we embrace that, we can move forward a little bit better in these transitions. We've done a lot of those transitions as a view, it's what you write about. In World War II, that's a scary space. And I always bring this up about war and family. Everyone is always looking at the soldiers, which you absolutely look what's going on and how we are placing our loved ones against each other, really, in the world, right? And then the kids and families who are not supposed to be touched are always touched in war. And how does a mother shelter, nurture when she's scared herself, have this strength and resilience? And so when you move, that's a whole other, do you stay with the enemy or do you move forward? Do you know what I mean, right?
Anne Frank said, first we make the choices and then the choices make us.
Wow, that's profound.
Yeah, it was her birthday 2 days ago, by the way.
Yes. We should have talked then. Yes.
It's, and I was fortunate, both my parents were athletes. My mother was a competitive runner when she was young, and my dad was a swimmer. And they had that, and again, Bonnie too says that they brought that sort of sense of being an athlete at life, having determination, knowing you could win and you could lose,
Oh,
a sense of sportsmanship that you depended on your team. And I was very fortunate.
diplomacy.
Yeah, yeah. See, there you go. And they brought that. They brought that to every occasion in our life. So even emigrating, even though it was difficult, and I won't say that it wasn't a difficult time, it was, but it was also a time where I really got to appreciate my parents. Not, I write about it in the book. At first, my mother and I had a little bit of difficulty because what happens with immigrants, of course, there's a change in the family dynamics. You know, so
Very much so.
I spoke English, my mom didn't. So here we are with a new language in a new country. And here she was this strong woman in World War II who stood up to the Nazis. And then suddenly she's in Australia and I'm her interpreter and I'm this
Oh,
God.
no matter what you do, you're in trouble. You're in trouble.
So that was an interesting dynamic too. But I think that also happens in changes and transitions. So again, where is the family resilience? Where is the relational resilience?
Yeah, and I think that has to be where you have such split moments when things have to move fast and war and things like that. You don't have time for drama. You don't
No.
have time for anything that's unnecessary. And I'm finding now in life that I really don't have time for anything unnecessary. I don't. And people don't get it. And you do lose friends over time. You don't want to, but life is life. And I think, you know, when you've gone through these experiences like you have, you really value those
Really
those
do it.
little moments and the people that are with you in
Yeah.
those moments. You're making these decisions at this time for our best well-being, our best welfare, and we have to be able to figure out who's trustworthy on what, where, how, these decision-making skills. And that is all life is making a decision. Even if you made the wrong decision, trusting yourself to get your butt out of it. So that's all it is. But when you're doing disasters, you're in it together. You know you cannot do it without somebody else, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
There is no escaping immigration, nothing happening with anybody without someone being part of it. You know, there's going to be someone somewhere. And that to me is like very humbling, where you start to realize, how do we treat each other? And I think that sometimes when people forget these stories, which is why I love that you've written another book, we tend to talk to each other as numbers and not humans. And I think World War II was a big emphasis on not teaching us to treat people as a symbol or a number, but as a human, right?
And you just mentioned the stories. And I think that's a really important part of this. And one of the reasons why I eventually actually did write this is, and I have an older, I'm just thinking for a moment, I have an older
okay.
daughter who was, grew up with my telling her stories. And I mention her in my book as a little, that she's a little girl in the book. But it's that when we start telling each other our stories, we begin to connect on a different level. Because when we think about it, and right now I'm kind of thinking, of course, you know, I'm in Santa Barbara, we're thinking about immigrants at the moment, you know, and what's happening. And then I'm thinking, if everyone goes back to their ancestral immigrant story, and we start sharing our stories, we overcome the differences. We begin to see how our experiences, our human experience, are actually very similar. And that brings us to,
That's why we travel, don't we?
oh, absolutely.
If we travel, we know that what they're saying on the news or whatever reflects, again, symbology, which I do enjoy, but it's not telling the actual richness behind that person's face that you see on a screen. You don't know who that person is. You don't know. You just have these little sound bites and everybody arguing about them. But if you travel, you get to know the people. We travel full time, as you know, and it's like we're in a different state all the time, and people go, well, what, this state, this and that. And I'm like, honestly, you can't look at it that way, because it's about meeting each individual person on their individual space.
That is such a profound statement, actually, that you just made. Meeting each person in their space. Yeah. And that's, I think, when I decided to write this book, after much prodding from my friends who really urged me after reading the first one, as I was writing it, and listening to that voice of that teenage girl that had gone to a different country, and then hearing my parents' voices in it, I really got that deep feeling of, gosh, this experience is just a human experience. Yes, my story happens in the 90s, but you could place it today with someone in a transition time. And
Mm.
their feelings, their human feelings, find resilience into themselves. It's going to be the same. It's going to be
Mm.
just the same. And I think that's the importance, that my dad taught me that everything is interconnected. He had a wonderful way of looking at the universe as a vast mystery where everything was interconnected. And my mother really believed in intentions. And rabbi friend of mine, Stephen Cohen, recently said that his faith is really rooted in that belief of the interconnectedness of everything in it.
John Mears famously said, everything's connected. It's all hitched upon the stars. It's all connected. I know that from the web of life of nature. The web of life, this eats this, it's all about the eating order, but it's also about how it all works together. And so because of the eating structure of animal beings, including fungi, which is animal and plant,
there you go. Yeah.
You have this whole connection, and it doesn't overeat because it doesn't want to kill off its food. There's this balance, this natural balance. As humans, sometimes need to remember that we're all connected. It's really true. That's why we're the blend, because we're not just this, we're not just that, we're not just this, we're not just that. Because if we could talk about art, it's connected to plants. It's connected to nature. Don't tell me anything in art didn't have anything to do with nature. Come on. It's all connected, every little thing. So this chopping off of things is chopping off history. It's chopping off.
Cutting out parts of ourselves. You loved this one chapter I have when my dad and I are walking in the bush in the evening, and he's talking like you're talking right now. And I'm this kind of angry teenager, I'm not going to this country school. I don't like here. I don't belong here. And he just calms me and gets me connected with the trees and then with the sky and the Southern Cross. And as I was writing the chapter, I was in tears because I remembered, and his patience and that way of helping me calm down and be in that interconnection.
Present. That's how intentions work. You have to be in the present for them to happen.
Yeah, totally present. Total presence. Yeah.
That's awesome. Did you go back to Australia for writing this?
Oh, yeah. I did a few years ago, and met with some family members, and I revisited the small town. Well, it's a small hamlet, really, just a few homes where we lived in the bush for a year. And there are a lot of memories there. How I love the Blue Mountains. And we had people, and I actually mentioned them in my acknowledgments because they took me back to certain places. They actually took me back. One family member took me back to the first immigration camp. It was the camp where we were being processed. We landed in Sydney, and then we were taken up to Bathurst, where there was an immigration center. Excuse me. And I had memories of that immigration center, and it is now a heritage site. And it had a wonderful plaque saying, really telling us how important the immigrants were. And it was very powerful. And going back, I think
it acknowledges you.
Yeah. And I was very, very lucky because the friends and family members took me to places that I wanted to write about. And walking there, the places have changed tremendously, of course, but walking there helped me ground the memories and really write about them from a place that was very embodied.
I love that, because I think that's some of the importance too of our historic sites across this country. is that it's telling people's family history. And everyone's arguing on history, taking things down, I mean, everyone, all sides. And I go, let history be. We can change how something's designated, maybe, of does this needs to be the entrance of your town if it was an evil person? Put him somewhere where you can still see who he is, because it's still art, and tell the full story. Can we start telling the full stories? Like you tell about, these personal stories. We don't get history if we do not attach it to a story that you can follow. If it is a timeline, nobody cares. Well, battle, timeline, this happened here. No, we don't care. We want the story because it's like that's how we can relate as human beings.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
when I was a young girl in school in Amsterdam, history was taught at my school with dates of wars and kings and
Yes.
the date. And I always used to say, "Oh, I hate history," as a teenager. And then I began to look at the stories, and of course movies came out about history, and I began to get more interested. And that's when I, like, as you're saying, I began to attach history to story. Then it became more meaningful. It was like, oh, these are the human, they're his stories, her stories.
Yes.
These are our human stories, and they're important.
They are. They are. Your story is important. I thank you for joining us again and writing 2 books. Are more coming? What's happening?
Everybody keeps asking me,
I know, but we love you. We want you to do
That's
more.
what I do with my life. I don't know. I'll write some essays and articles. If it falls together into a book, that'd be fine. But, I'm sort of blessed to have a long life so far, and each year is a gift. So,
Well, you're happy and healthy. Look at you.
oh,
It's like a joy to see you. You're like, oh, she's a smiling, happy face. I like this. You're making my day happy, and you're teaching us of resiliency. And that to me, I think I told you that that's like a word. Like, I think when we look at World War II, we look at change and immigration, migration, settling in, doing new things and having to through survival. Survival teaches us joy too. We get joy out of the smallest things, don't we? When you have to survive.
yeah.
And I
Much
just,
is that. Resilience is a resilient person is often a person who can just smile in the morning because it's a beautiful day. And it may be a very hard day, and they may be grieving a big loss, but in that resilience, there is also a place where you can appreciate what's good in life. And I think that's a big part of being resilient.
I couldn't say it better. Are you kidding me? That was perfect. I'm like, take that for a short on YouTube. It's perfect. It's perfect. It's because it's a journey. It's not an instant success.
Yeah.
It isn't. And once we understand the journey, then you can just kind of breathe back a bit and sit in the saddle as though you're riding a horse.
I don't know that would work for me.
And I'm starting to go like mine would be a donkey more, but
I tried riding horses, and I always found that they were way too high up.
oh well, we'll put you on a little scooter. How about that? We'll put you on a scooter. We'll take it. We'll take it slow. But it has been such a joy having you on the show. Thank you, Hendrika, for coming back. It has been a pleasure. And what you write, I know, resonates with people. And I'm hoping even more our younger generations to understand as they go through so much right now. I think going back into those times is something that is going to help them now as they face things almost on their own. I kind of feel,
Yeah, I think
but
so.
I don't want them to feel alone because they're not, but, it's the younger generation right now, the newest. This is a very new frontier for them.
Very,
We
very.
don't have that much advice. And I think the advice is, you've got to get ready for resiliency, get in the saddle,
Yeah.
and
Well,
and do it.
one of my friends, Maureen Murdoch, who wrote a lot about memoir and teaches memoir, said that we write and tell these stories so that our children, grandchildren, and I have a great grandchild, have memories upon which they can build. And they're going to need that, They're going to.
No, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. And everyone, again, we are here on Big Blend Radio all the time, every day, maybe twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day. But the website to go to is agirlfromamsterdam.com. And I know you can remember that. So check that out. It's also linked in the episode notes. Thank you, Hendrika. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.